Hi, it's Kristen, and this is going to be my 2022 reading wrap up. So, I'm just going to go over like some rough general statistic numbers of what I read last year, and then talk a little bit about some favourites, some least favourites. Let's get into it. So, I use Goodreads to track my reading. I did last year. I think this year, 2023, I'm going to use Goodreads and also Storygraph. I had a Storygraph account, never used it really. I used it for about a month and then sort of stopped. So I'm going to get better because I know that their end of year statistics, they do more interesting stuff about like genres you read and stuff like that, whereas Goodreads is more like, here's how many pages you read, here's the number of books you read, basics like that. And Storygraph does the same, but also some extras. But so this is Goodreads. So my reading goal was to read 40 books in the year. I read 39 and I'm mad about it. I know reading goals like don't really mean anything, and as long as you're reading and reading stuff you enjoy, that's what's important. But it does sort of annoy me knowing that there were some weeks in the year that I was like wanting to read, but I just wasn't, or I couldn't decide what to read, and so I didn't read for like a week or even 2 weeks at a time. And it's sort of like if I just picked something up within that time, I could have hit 40 books. Towards the end of the year, for the last couple of days, I was reading comics and novellas just to try and get there. And it was all stuff that I already owned, stuff that I'd had on my Kindle, some like novellas that I'd had on my Kindle for a while and just hadn't got around to, and a comic that a friend had gifted me either last Christmas or the Christmas before, perhaps. Or my birthday before. I don't know. I'd had them on my TBR for a while. So it was getting to stuff that I had been wanting to get to. I wasn't just reading any old thing. But sadly, I didn't quite get there. So yeah, 39 books read, which isn't bad by any means. It's the best I think I've done for a while by like a couple of books. But yeah. Jumping in here quickly because I forgot how I wanted to talk about my books, and the fact that actually my Goodreads total books read is not indicative of the books I actually read. On my Goodreads, don't ask me why, but I don't include rereads. I like to use my Goodreads to track like books I'm reading for the first time, or if I do include rereads, it's from years ago, like before I even got Goodreads, so they're not on there. But if there's like a book that I read last year and I reread again this year, I don't put it on my Goodreads. I don't know why. It's just how I do things. Don't question it. So in a little notebook, I keep track of every single book I read, because there's also some books in here that I read for my work book club, where I read on Zoom to some of our service users. We meet up once a week online and I just read to them for 50 minutes, like an hour session. We chat a little bit in between, and yeah, I just read chapters of books. We read a lot of sort of middle grade books. The longer ones of those I do include on my Goodreads, but some of the short ones that only take us like 1 hour to read, I don't include on my Goodreads, but I include in my notebook. So if I'm going for books I read for the first time, then it's the 39 that's on Goodreads. But if I'm going for books I read for the first time, rereads from previous years, and the book club books, then my total books for the year was 49 books, which is 10 more books than is tracked on Goodreads, so I hit that 40 goal technically. But I didn't read 40 new books, which is always ends up being the goal, is to read whatever my Goodreads goal is. It's new books. But 49 is still frustrating to me because I didn't hit 50. But 49 is better than I did last year. Not quite as good as 2020, but 2020 is a bit of an outlier because COVID. I just read a lot that year. It's better than 2019. It's a lot better than 2018. And it's better than 2017. So yeah, other than 2020, this has been my best reading year. Well, 2022 was my best reading year for 5 years. So yeah, that's pretty good to me. So in terms of reading and rereading and book club reading, I guess my goal for 2023 is to hit 50 books in here, because I almost did it. But yeah, just a little interlude to tell you that that's not fully how I track my books, but it's just a silly thing that I do. That's how I do things. Don't ask me why, because it's nonsensical. Back to other me. I read 11,452 pages. That's something else. The shortest book I read was 56 pages long, and that was Galatea by Madeline Miller, which is a retelling of the story of Pygmalion, and he brings a statue to life. But Madeline Miller's retelling is from the perspective of Galatea, the statue. The longest book I read was 548 pages, and that was The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman. This was the final full-length novel that I read last year, and I finished it the day before New Year's Eve, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I finished it. Yeah, in the second to last day of the year. But it was great. I loved it. This is the third and final book in the original His Dark Materials trilogy. So that was like a nice completion to the year, completing a series as my last book, and like a chunky one that I'd been meaning to read for ages, so that was nice. The average book length I read was 293. I didn't read many big books. This was obviously the biggest book I read. But I didn't read many big books, and towards the end of the year I was reading a few comics and novellas, so that would have taken the average book length down, I think. My average rating was 3.1. That's not good. I read quite a few 4 stars this year, and so I was hoping my average rating would go up. But I also think that the last few books I read, a couple of novellas I read, I only gave 2 stars, so that wouldn't have helped. I had another year of no 5-star reads. I've not had a 5-star read for a couple of years now, and it's really disheartening. I know that I'm really picky about what I will give a 5-star, but I also know that for me, a 5-star book is like a feeling. I just get this feeling of, this is 5 stars, and I can't quantify that I can't explain that feeling, but I just know when I read a book, I'm like, this is 5 stars, or this has the potential to be 5 stars. But my sister just thinks I'm really picky with what I give 5 stars, which is true. But I've not read anything that's given me that 5-star feeling. I read a few things that came close, but nothing that quite got there. So those are like my basic statistics. Then some things that I liked and disliked. So my most disappointing read of the year doesn't mean I didn't like it, just that it was disappointing because I thought it could be 5 stars, but it was a 3-star. Was Never Seduce a Scot by Maya Banks. This is a historical romance. I have loved the historical romance paperbacks that I have. This is about a young woman who is deaf, and she's like lost most of her hearing, and she gets put into an arranged marriage with a rival clan, hoping that they can create a union and not be rival clans anymore. And when she meets the guy that she's supposed to marry, she's very nervous. She doesn't really want to marry him, but when he speaks, she realizes that his voice is so deep and so low that she can sort of feel his voice, which she hasn't done with anyone else, and so that intrigues her. And so I thought, like, arranged marriage trope, main character with a disability rep, just the circumstances, the concept sounded really fun, and like I could really love it. But it was all right. I was disappointed, but I still read it very quickly and had fun while reading it. I just thought that I was going to love it, and I didn't. I thought it was okay. So that's my most disappointing. My most surprising was Felix Ever After by Case and Callender. This one I heard brilliant things about, so I always thought I would enjoy it. But in recent years, I've been sort of going away from YA a bit, not enjoying it as much as I used to, which makes sense. I'm, in my late 20s now. So I wasn't sure if this would read quite young to me, if I would be as involved as I would have been when I was younger, if I would have loved it as much. But I had such a great time reading this book. It really surprised me how much I enjoyed it. Gave it 4 stars. Really liked it. Yeah, not that I thought I wouldn't, but I was just surprised by how much I did like it. This is about Felix, who is black, queer and transgender, as it describes them on the back, and they are in art school, and an anonymous student begins sending Felix transphobic messages, like using his dead name and pictures of him before he transitioned, and so Felix takes it upon himself to try to figure out who this anonymous sender is. So it deals with quite difficult topics, all to do with gender and identity and sexuality and just who you are and who you feel like and how you present yourself to the world, and how other people perceive you, those kinds of topics. But yeah, it's great, and it talked a lot about art. Felix is an art student, he goes to an art school, so there was a lot of art discussion and creativity talk, which I really loved. So this surprised me in a good way. My least favourite book of the year was Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I read this in a reading vlog of reading the shortest books on my TBR. I just really didn't like this. Did not enjoy it. Don't get the hype. I gave it 2 stars. It didn't hold my attention. So this is about a mouse called Algernon, who is the subject of experiments to see if they can raise the IQ of an animal, and they do to this mouse Algernon, and then the scientists decide to experiment on a person, and so they find a man called Charlie who has, as the back says, an unusually low IQ, and so they give him this experimental surgery to see if they can increase his intelligence. Yeah, I just didn't love it. I didn't catch my interest. I didn't like any of the characters particularly. And yeah, I felt like the way that they talked about intelligence and disability could have been better. So this was not one for me. Yeah, that was probably my worst book. There was other books I gave 2 stars this year, a couple of novellas, but this is the one that like irked me the most. The others were just sort of throwaway books, but this one actively annoyed me. So that's my worst book. And then my best books, I have some options. Each of these things I gave 4 stars. Some of them like 4.5, but not quite 5. So first up we have The Black Flamingo by Dean Atter. This is about Michael, who is queer and becomes a drag queen, a drag artist. And it's all told in verse. It was so quick to read. I really felt captured in the story, wanting to read more, wanting to finish it. This is all about identity. Michael is a man of colour. He's queer. And yeah, so the whole thing is about his queer identity, his racial identity. Again, about like how he portrays himself, how people perceive him, his creativity. I feel like these go fairly well together in terms of themes and exploration. But yeah, I really loved this one. I want to read more from Dean Atter, but this is one of my favourite books of the year. Then a late contender, we had Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. This is a retelling of the story of Ariadne and Theseus and Dionysus and Phaedra, who is Ariadne's sister. It's mostly told from Ariadne and a bit of Phaedra's perspectives of their lives and the men who surround them and the gods, and how are their lives really their own, or are they just pawns in the stories of men, which I think a lot of Greek mythology retellings from the perspective of women often have that question. But yeah, I really liked this. It's one that almost feels like not a lot happens, even though it does. But it was slow, but I really liked that about it. It was very descriptive, very beautifully written. Yeah, I really want to read more from Jennifer Saint. I know she's got some more adaptations, I think, coming out. But yeah, I really liked this one. If you like your Greek mythology retellings from the perspective of female characters, I would highly recommend this one. It was great. And then coming in as very late contenders, literally like the last sort of few things I read in the year, one of these being the last novel I read of the year, we've got the whole His Dark Materials trilogy. I did a whole reading vlog about this series. I loved this series. It's about a girl called Lyra whose friend disappears, and she is determined to find out what happened to him, but she gets caught up in the schemes and plots of adult characters who are just doing big, wild things, like trying to just change humanity and the way that the world works. And yeah, Lyra really gets caught up in it. You have great discussions about theology and philosophy and religion and the concept of God, alongside these really fun fantasy adventure elements like armoured polar bears and demon creatures who can shapeshift, and little animal companions for everyone in the world. And the further you get in the series, the more complex and complicated all the different characters' storylines become, and how they weave within each other and how they impact each other's stories is just incredible. I got so absorbed in this series. I loved it. And when people talk about this being like a kid series, like the main characters are children, but the story, I think, can be enjoyed by all ages. I would definitely say maybe not like young kids, but you know, tweens, teens, adults. I'm 27. I loved this series. My mum liked it when she read it years ago, but still says she looks back fondly on it. My sister, who's a few years younger than me, read it a couple of years ago, so yeah, when she was probably like 20 or so, and she loved it too. Yeah, it's just, oh, such a good series, such a good series. So glad I finally got around to reading those. So yeah, that is it. That was my 2022 in reading. I'm going to do a video all about my 2023 goals, and I hope you will watch that if you're interested. But thank you for watching this, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!